Welcome to the Amplifying Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Tara Lehman, a partner, coach, and consultant at Twin Life Coaching and Business Services, of which Amplifying Leadership is a division. This podcast is the place dedicated to amplifying your leadership through our guest stories, tips, information, and more. To learn more about our leadership division, please visit us anytime at amplifyingleadership.ca. Today, I am welcoming Emma Collyer, owner of Aspire Executive Coaching. Welcome to Amplifying Leadership.
Thank you for having me. I am excited to be here.
And I'm happy for this topic. But before we give that away, why don't you tell us a little bit about your leadership story?
Yeah, I guess so. Originally, I'm from the UK, and my leadership journey started there. So I worked for nearly 15 years in a government agency and kind of moved through team leadership to larger teams and then departmental. So lots of different experiences there. And then we moved to Canada in 2018. And I secured a position as a director in a conservation authority here in Ontario, Canada, and continued my leadership journey there, and then set my business up in 2021 and transitioned into that full time in 2022. So a lot of my work pulls from those experiences that I had both in Canada and in England as well.
Excellent. All right. Tell me this hot topic, this hidden key to exceptional leadership. What is it and why is it so important?
Yeah, I think talk about active listening. So this for me is a huge topic. I talk a lot about this with organizations and with individuals. And I really feel that this is something very powerful that we forget to use. And so I often, when I'm working with individuals and teams, I encourage them to start thinking about what that looks like for them and how they can embrace that and the power that it can bring to their performance for themselves and with individuals as well.
Well, before we get talking about how active listening really can be helpful, why don't we start with looking at what challenges some organizations are really actually facing when we aren't actively listening as leaders? What is it that they're challenged with when they aren't thinking about that as part of that communication toolbox, if you will?
Yeah, I think what can often happen is that problems can manifest over time because we're not fully exploring what the root causes of an issue, and we're only dealing with issues at a surface level. And so over time, problems get bigger and bigger until somebody has to step in and sort them out. And that causes delays in getting things done, can impact investment, etc., etc. There's huge implications from not doing this. And I think we underestimate the power of what it can bring.
I think so too. Why don't you give our audience a definition for those who maybe aren't as familiar with what active listening actually is? Why don't you give them a bit of a definition so that when we continue with our conversation, everybody's understanding what we're referring to?
Yeah, I talk about active listening as being it's a deliberate communication technique, and it kind of involves us fully concentrating, understanding, responding, and remembering what is being said by the other person. So there's a few different pieces in there, but that's how I would describe it.
Great. So I want to come back to something you mentioned, which is root cause. Help our audience understand maybe how can active listening, piece of communication, which is really important, help us get to the root cause of, say, a problem or a challenge that they need to overcome. How do they correlate?
Yeah, I think often in a conversation, we go in with an assumption of we know what the problem is and we know how to fix it. So before the other person has even started speaking, we've got our own sorts of, hey, I know what's going on here. Let's solve the problem. And because we're going with that mindset, we're not adding curiosity to it, and we're not asking questions, and therefore we're not actually discovering what might be the real problem. So you might sometimes hear the problem is I'm going to say a symptom, this person is not doing something, but actually the reason they're not doing something is because they don't have the right information. So it's trying to unpick some of that. And I think we forget about that all the time. And I do this myself, have to catch myself. We go in
Mhm.
with an assumption or a judgment of this is what's going on here. And we don't allow the other person to really fully explain. And we don't ask good questions to find out more.
It's interesting. I was just talking with a client before our conversation today about them making assumptions about one of their employees rather than having a conversation and being curious about, what was going on in the situation, which I'm not going to share here, but we really, I mean, we're humans, so we are trying to protect ourselves. It's a safety thing that we put assumptions in our minds. How do you suggest that we stop doing that when we're going to be talking to an employee or someone and we need to actively listen? How do we stop that assumption or the mouse? I always call it the mouse wheel in your mind, making these little thoughts already there before we even start asking the questions.
Yeah, I think I often talk about, take a pause. So if
Mm,
someone's saying, "Hey, can I grab you for 5 minutes? I need to share something with you." Okay, let's just take a pause, listen to what the other person is talking about. You can use lots of different techniques, nodding,
mm.
asking questions, making eye contact, all these different things, but just taking a moment so the other person has a full amount of time to really share properly.
And I like to also add in as well, is get rid of the dings, the pings, and those notifications and all of those distractions as well, right? I mean, that's a really big piece of active listening, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as particularly in leadership roles, we have so many pulls on our time that we're constantly checking emails, we're constantly checking our calendar and what's coming up next. I think even if you have to have your phone with you, just turn it over so you can't see the screen because that does two things. It stops you from being fixated on what's going on your screen, but it also signals to the other person, I'm listening to you now. I'm here with you. I'm not getting distracted by my phone, and turn off the notifications if it is making an audible noise as well. But that is huge.
I think we are so addicted to all the notifications that we get these days, and it can be very difficult. So, love the idea of putting it upside down or just turning the sound off, even. Just get rid of that distraction. I told one person, just close the laptop so you don't see the things keep popping up, right? Anything that allows you to focus on the person talking rather than it be focused on what's that next message I have, because then we're not truly listening. Which brings me to question about culture, because a lot of organizations, the culture is the manager's so busy, they don't have time, they just, you know, do whatever, give an answer. Maybe they talk to you while they're answering an email, which is not active listening. How can we start to create a culture that it's more about being curious? It's more about asking for feedback. It's more about listening. How do we start that?
I think we have an opportunity as leaders to demonstrate the behaviours we want to see in others. Um,
Mm.
we forget how much people watch us when we're in a leadership position and how others replicate what we do. So if all the leaders who are maybe sat in a meeting together have their phones turned off, maybe put away, and they are fully present and engaged, people are going to notice that and they're going to start replicating it. So I think there's definitely a piece here about behavior and demonstrating the behavior you want to see, which builds that culture that you mentioned there around that curiosity and being fully engaged.
It's the whole lead by example, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's huge.
If someone has never really done this before, maybe they are somebody who's just been not taught this. Like this is not something that we're taught. There's no leadership handbook out there, although I'm sure everybody wishes there was one. Unless you come to a coach or a trainer or somebody who can teach you this, it's hard to understand how to get started. So if this is not part of our current toolbox, are there steps that help us understand how to start actively listening to people?
I think the thing you mentioned there, the distractions, I would say that's the first thing. So remove distractions. This is about being fully present with somebody. So other things I would say, try and make eye contact with the person as well. You know, if you're focused on your phone or looking out the window or getting distracted with other things, again, that signals you're not fully there. So no distractions, eye contact, ask clarifying questions. So if
Mm,
someone's sharing something with you, okay, so, oh, I want to hear more about that. Can you tell me a bit more? So what was going on here? Tell me a bit more. So there's those questions to get more information. I would say avoid interrupting. The amount of
yes.
the amount of times I've seen people jump in and want to contribute to it because they're engaged in the conversation, but it then alters the direction of where that person goes with what they're sharing. So avoid interrupting. And another technique I talk about is reflecting back or summarizing what the person has said. So you're
Mm.
confirming you've really understood. So those are some different pieces that anybody can try out. You can start trying out one or two and then kind of build on that. See if it's like, I can't remember all of these things in one go.
Hmm. And I want to come back to what we've been talking about, being curious as well, and like summarizing questions and open questions, and utilizing those to really understand the other person's perspective, which can be really important if there's a disagreement or a conflict,
Mm.
even between people. So what could be some examples of questions that help people just ask for more feedback? And it doesn't need to be specific unless you want to use a specific example, but do you have some question examples that they're open, we're eliciting feedback, we're trying to understand them more?
Yeah, I think if someone shared something with you, a question I was trying to go off the top of my head, so what do you think could be happening here?
That's a good one. Hmm.
Because I think it then puts it on them to go, well, actually, I think it's this, rather than you coming up with a solution. I would always say use open questions around using what questions is great. So
Hmm.
what else could be happening here? What other options do we have? What else have you explored? What else do we need to think about going forward? So there's all those
Hmm.
kinds of different questions that are exploratory and feel collaborative rather than, I would say, judgmental or going in a particular direction.
And to speak to your point earlier, it really helps us understand what it is they're trying to say, especially if it might be a little confusing. We could ask them to even, I'm not following you. Could you say that in a different way? Or, something like that, right?
Yeah. So yeah, you've told me 10 things. So what's the one priority here that we really need to
Hmm.
fix today? Getting them to kind of zone in is great. Great question.
And I just want our audience to understand the difference between open and closed questions. Did you want to explain that? Go ahead.
So a closed question would be, do you want to go on holiday? Yes or no? So, sorry, vacation, yes or no?
Hmm.
Um, so that would be a closed question because there's only two answers there. And so you're
Hmm.
sending them down a particular direction rather than what vacation would you like to go on? So it's opening that up. So there's options, there's priorities, opportunities there.
Hmm. Okay. And it does help us, like if we use the vacation one, asking if someone wants to go on vacation this year at work, well, probably the answer is yes. But if we say, when would you like to go on vacation? Or what did you want to do or what is your plan for vacation this year? Then we know what the request is, right?
Yeah, that's a great example. I love that.
Yeah. So I also want to talk about the questions because it really does get them to think. I don't want to say for themselves, it's not quite the right thing, but to be solution focused, especially if they bring a challenge to us. And these open questions, you had some great ones earlier that really, it's like, well, tell me more about that, or why do you think this happened? It brings out their solutions as well, does it not?
Yeah, I think absolutely does. And I think as leaders, we can get fixated on being the one that always has to provide the answer,
Hmm.
which is exhausting. And we don't always have the right answers as leaders.
That.
Often the person coming to us knows what the right answer is, but we draw that out of them. So a great question would be, okay, so you've told me a lot about this issue, this challenge, this problem. What do you think the options are that we have going forward? they've likely have come up with some ideas already.
Hmm.
Or what would you recommend based on what you know about this? So again, it's getting their thoughts. As a leader, you might take a different road, you might choose to do something differently, but at least you're encouraging them to think about what is going on here. And if I was in their shoes, what would I do right now?
And I was just recording a video for my community about decision fatigue. And if we ask them for some solutions, I find, and maybe in your experience, you find this as well, suddenly as the leader, we have solutions and we can make an easier decision instead of trying to come up with all the solutions, trying to come up with all the facts. Like someone maybe has done a little bit of this homework, right? And that decision is easy.
Absolutely. I'm just, as you're talking, reflecting back to a situation I had a few years ago, and we had a very complicated technical issue on a project site. And I was kind of in a leadership position at the time. And we kind of had option A and B, and neither were good. Both were pretty bad. And so I sat down with the technical expert and said, "Hey, we've got A and B here. Neither work. What else can we do?" And he came up with this fantastic option that
Hmm.
nobody had thought of before. And it was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. But had we not had that conversation and thought about what else is possible, we would never have got there. And so it took us to a completely different place. And I just think sometimes we forget to do that and explore
Hmm.
what else is possible.
And that's all about the listening too, right? It's so, so important that we take time to listen to people because as leaders, we don't always have the right answers, do we? We'd like to believe we do, but not always. Let me take it from the leader to the employee. I mean, let's say now as leaders, we understand active listening. You know, there's that famous quote, can't remember who said it, but we have two ears and one mouth so that we listen twice as much as we speak. How do we teach our employees to also actively listen? Because a lot of the conflict can happen between coworkers, and so how can we actually make active listening a piece of our culture that our employees do as well? To lead by example, but also how do we encourage them to do this?
Yeah, I think you can obviously have the one-on-one conversation if you're noticing particular behaviours with an individual, encourage them to try different approaches that are more aligned with active listening that we've been talking
Mm,
about. But you can also set the tone for a meeting. I was thinking at the beginning, it's like, okay, this is the meeting we're having today. I'm going to ask you all to turn your phones off, turn your laptops off. We're going to have no
mm,
distractions. I'm going to ask you all to contribute and be respectful of each other and not interrupt. And so, even just with those small things, you're setting the playground almost for,
mhm.
let's have these intentional conversations where we are fully present and we're listening to each other and we're not trying to jump in with the solution all the time.
It's really about just really teaching them, isn't it, that this is the way we're going to move forward and that we want to hear and we value your opinions and things like that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I want to talk about something that happens when we're really good listeners, which is the awkward pause, because going back to the assumptions, right, that you were talking about earlier, is that we can make assumptions and we just want to answer right away. If someone asks us a question or we make an assumption, but sometimes if we have that awkward pause, it allows the other person to process the question we're asking or whatever that is and actually allows them to give us feedback that's important. The awkward pause is weird for a lot of people. Do you have any strategies about how to use the awkward pause or, just how it can benefit when we're having that communication?
Yeah. I was just reflecting as you were saying that because we often, I would say introvert, extrovert personalities, a lot of introvert personalities, and I'll probably class myself in that, need time to process messages, take time to think about what they want to say, whereas more extrovert would just say it and they're processing it as they're saying it. So it's just very different approaches. So I think that's being mindful that when you're working with individuals, that you've likely got a mix of
Mm.
those kind of groupings, if you like, of personalities and how they show up. But I think really just making that space for those conversations is key, and just allowing. I think with the pause, I've almost encouraged people to kind of sit on their hands in meetings as a physical
Ah,
way of
yes.
stopping themselves from jumping in. Just as a reminder, what can you do to stop yourself? And just those small kind of physical changes that you can do as a bit of a reminder to make that space. As I was reflecting on this, also speaking with a client this week, had a great conversation and took the time to really pause. And it went in a completely different direction after that. And he was sharing all kinds of different things. And had I not done that, we would have stayed in a particular space or
Mm,
particular conversation. And so it's always a good reminder for myself. It's like, okay, I need to keep doing that and not maybe
hmm.
shortening the pause, allow that pause to go a little bit awkward, as you said, and maybe
Yes.
see how far it can go before you intervene and let the other person jump in.
Absolutely. And the awkward pause can be highly powerful, as you noticed, right? It just switched your conversation altogether.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this. Is there anything that you wanted to share with our audience on active listening, strategies, etc., that we have not yet covered?
Oh my goodness, what have we? I think I guess the only thing we've probably not covered as much is the kind of key of body language. So
Mm,
often with active listening, that we talked about the eye contact, but sometimes nodding in kind of acknowledgement of what the other person is saying, and kind of having your body faced towards them as well when if you're in a one-on-one conversation in person. Those little pieces help with being present
hmm.
and kind of recognizing the other person speaking.
Yeah, I love that. And it's something that you probably notice that I do when I'm listening is I do nod quite a bit because it's also letting the other person know that you're very engaged with them in the
Yes.
conversation. Is there a key takeaway you want our leaders to know about today when it comes to active listening?
I think I would always encourage people to reflect what they're doing right now and then think, how can I be more present in my next conversation? What can I do? We've talked about a whole range of things. There is something
Mm-hmm.
that everybody can do to be more present. So what is that? And so that will be my key takeaway. Be present and reflect on what you're doing right now.
Love that. Love that. Because without reflection, we don't know where to go forward. So I love that. Excellent. Thank you so much for a great conversation on a fun, highly important topic that I love. If our audience wanted to learn more about you or find you online to connect, is there a way that they can do that?
Yeah, so my website, I've got a lot of information on there, which is aspireexecutivecoaching.com. I also have some free resources around this topic. So I have a link set up for that. So needmoretrust.com is where to go for that. And there's recordings, some resources as well.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. We always like those additional things that can help us lead stronger and more effectively as well. And thank you for your time for speaking today about active listening. I greatly appreciate that.
Thank you so much. It's great being here.
Of course, we thank you, our audience. We do hope you gain some valuable insights or tips from our conversation on active listening today with Emma. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us a great rating. It helps us and our guests like Emma reach even more leaders with helpful stories, information, and advice. We love helping other leaders grow and thrive and would love for you to consider joining our new Amplifying Leadership Circle community. You do not need to lead alone. We do know that leadership is better when we do it together. For more information about our community and all of our Amplifying Leadership services, please visit us anytime at amplifyingleadership.ca, a division of Twin Life Coaching and Business Services. Until next time, remember, leadership matters.